Two disclaimers before I get into this one. Notwithstanding the title that I'll probably go with for this video, this is not an analysis of the whole budget. It's looking at particular parts of it. I'll be absolutely honest, economics is not my background, so I'm not really in a position to talk in great detail of on fiscal policy, but there are certain aspects of it that obviously concern me. Um, the other thing is my own situation, because inevitably talking about money, that might invite people to wonder about that. I'm basically in part-time work. I'm not signing on, but I'm in part-time work and it is a struggle. Um, I work as an English tutor, and that is an industry that is really not very sustainable. The reason I don't talk about that in great detail on my channel is simply because it's quite personal. It gets into matters of how much income I get and so on, and I just don't want this channel to go down that very, very personalized route, because inevitably it would invite scrutiny and, you know, of course, a lot of people would be sympathetic, but you will get trolls in that sort of situation to attract them. So, you know, broadly, I am in part-time work, and it is a struggle. I think that's enough information about my personal situation. But this budget has been uh, kind of a bit of a cold water, I think, on the British people. It's how it's being portrayed. This is a cover of the Times from October the 31st. And a lot of the tabloids are going with the pumpkin thing, it's a Halloween budget. So that's the cover of the Times. This was the Sun. So, like I said, a Halloween theme there. Quite an unflattering photo, but an unflattering picture of Rachel Reeves. Um, she's a history maker. She's the first woman in this office in over 700 years, so it is quite a significant thing. Apparently, Kimmy Badenoch's come out and said she hasn't broke glass ceilings. If that's true, that's kind of ridiculous, and I think a bit petty of Badenoch to say that. If it's true, it might just be Twitter fodder. But of course she's broken glass ceilings. I mean, I'm going to be quite critical of Reeves in this video, but first woman to occupy the second most powerful job in the country in the Treasury in centuries. Of course, it's historic. But of course, that's nothing to do with what sort of budget she delivers. Um, what I want to talk about is what I expected with Labour, which is the impact on welfare, and particularly some of the most vulnerable people in the country, of which I'm not included. I'm not disabled. I'm not a vulnerable adult. I don't have any of those sort of issues, but I've huge empathy for those who do. I've long argued that the DWP in this country is cruel. I think there's far too much focus on punitive sanctions. And when Labour came to power in July, I wasn't dewy-eyed about them being any different. I really didn't think they would be, because I'm old enough to remember back in the late 2000s, Gordon Brown's government was just as hardline as David Cameron's. The rhetoric actually, I was going to say the rhetoric may not have been as hardline, but that government had these posters of, homing in on benefit dodgers and this sort of thing. Benefit dodgers, benefit fraudsters. It was so. What we see with the DWP is a consistency. When conservatives say Labour props up lifetime welfare dependency, it's a misconception, because they're ignoring the fact that Labour politicians are just as hardline on claimants as they are. I mean, both sides play politics, and I'm sick and tired of both Labour and the Tories using welfare claimants as a political punching bag. Now, I've said before, people who abuse the system, that's wrong. It's wrong on the taxpayer, and it's wrong on it's unfair on other claimants. It's a little bit like illegal migrants who may commit crime, unfairly tarnishing all migrants with the same brush. We have to be very, very careful about demonizing entire groups. And that's not politically correct. It's just a question of being reasonable. Um, so anyway, this is a piece from the Times on the effect of disabled people. Very quick one before I read this. The videos I've made on this subject have tended to get quite a lot of traction. I don't know if this will or not. I can never be sure. But I made one, for example, on Sunak's welfare policies, and it got 10,000 views, which is a lot by the standards of my channel. My recent video on Liz Kendall's welfare policies got over 500. So clearly there is an interest out there, and I hope this video gets that sort of traction as well. So please feel free to share. This is by Chris Smith, the Whitehall editor. Disability campaigners criticised the Chancellor for pressing ahead with Tory plans to cut benefits for 400,000 people with mobility and mental health problems. Rachel Reeves said she had to ensure that welfare spending was more sustainable and refused to fine £1.3 billion to cancel changes that will cost hundreds of thousands of claimants more than £3,000 a year each and require them to prepare for work. She promised a crackdown on fraud in our welfare system. Of course she did, which is estimated to save £4.3 billion through thousands more benefits inspectors and power to access bank account details. That's to me very disturbing, and I'll explain why in a minute. With a record 2.8 million people off work with long-term sickness, the number of people on incapacity benefit has risen more than a third since 2019. The Office for Budget Responsibility says an older, sicker population will mean that the proportion of the population in work will continue to fall over the Parliament. Reeves promised £240 million to test local approaches to helping people get back to work. The Conservatives announced changes a year ago that mean people with mobility problems would find it far harder to qualify for incapacity benefit, and fewer people would be able to claim under safety net rules designed for um, those at risk of suicide. Dame Jennifer Dixon, chief executive of Health Foundation, said that upholding the Tory cuts would risk pushing more people into poverty. James Taylor of the disability charity Scope said the budget flies in the face of the government's commitment to put disabled people at the heart of everything they do. Samuel Thomas of the Z2K housing charity described his decision as bitterly disappointing. He added, disabled people living in poverty will bear the brunt of these cuts. It's absolutely callous, and I'm disgusted by it. I'm not surprised, but I'm disgusted. I made a video a while back specifically talking about the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, but the Chancellor also has a big responsibility here. She is in charge of the country's finances. Now, it's an unenviable job. It's one of the hardest jobs in politics. And I appreciate that in no budget can any Chancellor please everyone, but surely some of the most vulnerable people in society should be considered. And it just flies in the face of Labour being supposedly more compassionate than the Tories. They're not. They're really not. Whatever the rhetoric says. Um, this thing about more benefit inspectors and powers to access bank account details. Well, look, if you have strong indications that someone's frauding the system, fine. That's they can be arrested for welfare fraud. But my big concern about this, and I mentioned this in the video made on Liz Kendall, is how can we trust that human oversight won't be flawed? I mean, look at what happened with the postmasters. Hundreds of people unfairly prosecuted for something that they hadn't done. I can definitely see a situation here where hundreds, maybe thousands of claimants are going to be unfairly branded as fraudsters, maybe due to administrative errors. I mean, Kendall claims it's nonsense that there won't be flaws. That is an arrogant position to take because we've seen this. We've seen this in the Tory years. That innocent people have been unfairly accused of fraud. We've seen cases of people who are terminally ill getting harassing, threatening letters from the DWP. It infuriates me, quite honestly. It's utterly callous. And if you have a person who is already struggling with disability or serious mental health challenges, and they're being threatened by the DWP, that's not going to help them. That's going to push them even further into depression or the risk of self harm, or in the worst case scenario, suicide. In which case, the government, frankly, will have blood on its hands. Um, I mean, I think Reeves and Kendall are just trying to. I don't know what they're trying to do because this isn't even politically necessary in the sense that Labour won a resounding victory. So it's not like they won a narrow victory and they need to appeal to Tory voters. They don't. I just think it's heartless. And again, I know that no budget is going to please everyone, but I do think some of the most vulnerable people in society should be a lot more considered. And this is just throwing them under the bus. I mean, this thing about more benefits to spectres and powers, DWP already has a sanction culture. And as for this thing about, more people are claiming capacity benefits, well, we have an aging population. That's just common sense that when you get more older people, for example, um, there are going to be more people reliant on that. And also, we have a better understanding of issues like around mental health than we did in previous decades. So I don't believe that this big rise in incapacity benefit just because there's a lot of people who are cheating the system. I believe it's because demographics have changed. I believe it's because we have a better understanding of some of these issues. Now, I'm not naive. There will be people who abuse the system. I know recently there was a Bulgarian gang that was raking in millions. It's right that they went to jail because, it was a huge amount of money, 54 million, I believe. They cheated people. They cheated the taxpayer. So I have no interest in defending people like that. Okay, what I have a problem with is this collective punishment. I mean, this thing about, I think it sort of reminds me of this hostile environment that the Home Office was trying to create to deter migrants, which is roundly condemned and which adversely then affected the Windrush generation. But in a similar way, I think with this hardline rhetoric, with this scapegoating rhetoric, with these constant threats towards claimants, I think Reeves and Kendall and the Tory predecessors, what they've collectively done is try to create a hostile environment for claimants. Now, when the Labour government pioneered the welfare state, it has older origins, actually goes right back to the People's Budget of 1909 in terms of its origins. But the post-war welfare state was set up as a safety net, and I do not believe that Attlee's Labour government envisaged this sort of hardline approach. Now, any government in power um, has to be responsible. I get that. I just think that Reeves, by focusing to be so hard line on this, it's just, I mean, I think it's probably a case of they've just got into power and she'll fit all well. Maybe my next budget will be a little bit softer and people will forget this. This has a real impact on people's lives. Like I say, uh, if someone's suffering severe anxiety, imagine what that's going to do to their mental health. To have this threat of inspectors coming to see if they're really, um, you know, depressed. I know that people close to me have, for example, turned up to appointments with the DWP, and the employee of the DWP just didn't bother to show up, or they were an hour late, and then it's the claimant that gets in trouble. I know that working in the DWP isn't easy. I don't want to imply that it is, but I think there's far too much blame put on claimants, and frankly, sometimes it is the fault of employees in the DWP. Um, in the late 2000s, at that time I was signing on, and there was a workfare program under Brown's government, and I remember job centre staff basically talking down to me because you do get people in the system who have a little bit of power and they know it. And they're bullies, basically. I'm not saying all of them, but I've dealt with other people in the DWP who are fine, they're reasonable people, but you do get people in the DWP who are callous bullies. They have a little bit of power and they know they can just sanction people at the drop of a hat. It was different during the pandemic because that was an exceptional situation. But now the pandemic's already over, we're back to the old cold DWP. Um, it honestly sickens me. And what about overseas corporations, not paying the fair share of tax? Reeves talks about this 40 billion pound black hole in the economy. Well, that's politically convenient. Interestingly enough, and I mentioned I wasn't going to go into deeper economics here, I am specifically talking about the welfare thing. But Sunak actually points out, I'm going to write, not that I'm parroting Sunak here, and not that I want to, but taxes up, borrowing up, inflation up, growth downgraded, not my verdict on the budget, but that of the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. And these are apparently the highest taxes since Norman Lamont's budget of 1993, so over 3 decades. Um, rail fares are going to increase as well, although I may make a specific video on the state of our railways. I'm going to just read out some in numbers segment here in the Times, just it's convenient. So, £40 billion, how much the Chancellor said she will raise in extra taxes each year. £32 billion, the average annual spending to be funded by borrowing over 5 years. £70 billion, extra spending as a result of budget policies over 2% of GDP. 38.3%, tax burden as a percentage of GDP in 2027-28, the highest since 1948. 77 minutes, Rachel Reeves' speech, longer than any chancellor since 2010. 22.6 billion, increased spending on the NHS. 35,000 pupils expected to leave or not start at private schools, now subject to VAT. And like I say, I'm really not going to go through every aspect of this. That would take hours, right? But there is something else I want to just quickly cover. The Times quotes the winners of this budget: higher earners, lower earners. One good thing, and there isn't much to be pleased about in this budget, but one good thing, it's a national living wage for workers aged over 21 will rise from £11.44 to £12.21. It's not a massive rise, but it is a rise. It's better than nothing, so that's something. Those aged 16 and 17 will receive an 18% rise from £6.40 to £7.55 per hour. I will say, though, that there's some sectors, particularly catering, and I know this from experience, I've been a waiter, where if you have, for example, the minimum wage or the national living wage, there are some very unscrupulous employers out there who disregard it, and who will pay less. I would say the hospitality sector particularly has a problem with that, in my experience. Because when I was a young man, when I was 19, and I wasn't savvy enough to really stand up for myself, as a waiter, and I don't want to go into huge details here, but as a waiter, I remember the managers docked our tips once because they claimed that tables hadn't been wiped properly. Now, in this country, tips aren't mandatory. Customers are giving tips, it means they're happy. That surely is the main thing, that customers are happy. And I later found out that I was being paid less than the legal minimum wage at that time for my age. So, hospitality is a sector that I think has a lot of corruption and abuse. So other winners, carers, will be able to earn more before losing their carers allowance worth about 4,259. I'm going to end up reading all this, so I'll just go through it briefly. Pensioners, drivers, electric vehicle owners, pubs and hospitality all benefit from the budget, according to the Times. Losers, inheritance tax. Um, the tax will be applied to pensions from April 2027 in a blow to savers who left retirement pots untouched to pass them on to the next generation. Allowances that mean everyone can pass on £325,000 tax free, rising to £500,000 when passing on your main home to a direct descendant, was due to be unfrozen in 2028 but will now stay frozen until 2030. Investors, landlords and second homeowners, employers, well, some of that, okay, you could say that that's labour being labour, fair enough. Employers, private schools, non-doms, farmers, smokers. They forgot to include the disabled, because the report I've just read by Chris Smith shows that the disabled are going to be hit hard by this, and it is reprehensible, absolutely reprehensible. I'm going to wrap this up, but in conclusion, I don't say that the Chancellor should just throw everything at disabled people. I mean, just give people absolutely all the support that might be ideal. But at the very least, a budget should recognise that there are vulnerable people in society, and this threat of more welfare inspectors, of an even more punitive system, I just think it is deeply flawed because the human oversight claims that Liz Kendall are making, I do not trust them. I absolutely do not trust them. I mean, they're talking about bringing in technologies to snoop on people. Critics have called it a snooper's charter. Kendall calls that nonsense. I call her attitude nonsense. It absolutely will be a snooper's charter. I mean, there's also a question here of due process. People merely suspected of welfare fraud before they've even been arrested or convicted of anything are going to be, snooped on. Um, like I say, there might be common sense things. If someone says they can't walk and they're seen, running a marathon, obviously that's going to raise question marks. But what I really, really have a problem with, and this gets totally overshadowed, that was a little article. This really does affect a lot of people. Um, People who have debilitative illnesses, who really are legitimately disabled, who have legitimate mental health problems. So remember, they might look physically healthy. They may not even look like they have any intellectual disability problems or anything like that. But mental health covers a very broad field. And, the suicide rate in this country is significantly higher than the homicide rate. It's a real problem, particularly for young men, but generally it is a problem. So I just think that people who are relying on the DWP, life is going to be even harder. And I think it's Reeves and Kendall trying to make it harder because they want to kind of force people off the system. It may well be politics. I long suspected that the Tories kind of manufactured the figures because people were forced off welfare because they just got so fed up of being treated like criminals. Um, I think there's very few people who would want to voluntarily go into a system where you have advisors who talk down to them, where there's a punitive sanction culture. One of the biggest misconceptions out there is it's just free money. Granted, there are some people who will get money from the state with not obligations in the way that other claimants would have. But the narrative that signing on just means free money is far, far, far too simplistic. And anyone who's been through the system, anybody who has been through the system will know what it's like. So I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted that this Labour government is no different from the Tories, arguably even worse. Arguably even worse. Even Ian Duncan Smith, who was vilified as Work and Pension Secretary, even he didn't go so far as proposing that people have their bank accounts spied on and technology would be used to request that airlines hand over information, this sort of thing. It is Orwellian and it's callous. I think where there is common sense suspicion that someone is abusing the system, fine. But my concern is this is just going to be sweeping and it's going to treat people who are law abiding and who are legally entitled to welfare. It's actually going to put them off claiming, and that's going to create a lot more hardship out there. People are going to be put off legally claiming because they think I'm going to be treated like a criminal if I do, even though I've done nothing wrong. That's an absolute disgrace that we have a system that should be a safety net, but people are put off it because of the attitude of Reeves and Kendall and this Labour government. It's an absolute disgrace, and I am absolutely disgusted by it. This is absolutely going to create more mental health problems for people, and in the worst case scenario, sadly, people are going to take their own lives. And people can say, "Oh, that isn't. You can't blame the government for that." I disagree. When you have components that are pushing people over the edge, common sense dictates that that is going to play a role. And just like 14 years of Tory rule, um, I'm just so fed up of successive governments using claimants as a political punching bag. I'm sick of it.